This is The Poet and the Poem from the Library of Congress. I'm Grace Cavalieri. Greg Orr is here with us, and he was Professor Emeritus of English at the University of Virginia, where he taught for 45 years and founded and directed the first Master of Fine Arts program in writing. But more than that, he's one of America's most beloved poets. And you're going to hear a poem now. Hey, Greg, read to us.
Okay. Um, this comes from a book where the poems don't have any titles. They just, the opening line is the title. In this case, it's Whitman's List of Things He Could See. Whitman's list of the things he could see as he sat, half paralyzed, an old man by a woodland pond. The names of the different trees, the birds he glimpsed or only heard, yet recognized by their songs. The bushes and grasses that grew there. How happy those lists made him.
Mm.
Red oak, hickory, poplar, larch. Gazing from where he loafed on the bank or from the pond itself, where he floated naked in the round pool of it, as if he were the pupil in a wide open eye. And the trees around it, delicate and strong as lashes. Oh, the world, what eye is wide enough? What pupil sufficiently diligent? Let's put our poems in the book. Let's add what we see to the beautiful list.
Yes, Greg, let us do that. Greg is the author of 13 collections of poetry, most recently selected books of the beloved Copper Canyon Gold Standard Press, and Norton will publish his new collection, Coming to Learn, next year. Greg, I have to confess, this is totally selfish because I wanted to talk to you. Every poet I know keeps quoting you, and I want to quote you too. So I want my time with you. And that is such a beautiful poem. I have so many questions to ask, and I'm going to ask them all today and see what happens. And the first is about the spirit of poetry. Now, I've taught my whole life, and you have too. And we know what remains is not the language so much or the word or the breath on the page. It's the spirit of the poem. What can you help me with that? What is it that remains and what is the spirit of language? And I know you can help me with this because your language is an exemplar of that. What is that?
Wow,
The
that's
spirit
not a
of the
little
word,
question,
the
is it?
spirit of the word. Is it the poet's intention
Yeah.
on the page? Is it the poet's passion on the page? Is it because if it's not the truth, it doesn't work. We know that. Is it the poet's truth on the page?
Mhm.
Is it his a vibration? But is it something bigger than language? If you don't know, then you're my mom.
Okay,
Okay.
we can stop there for a second. I'll try to start something. For me, as a poet, as a person, there isn't anything larger than language. Language seems to me to be this amazing mystery that creates worlds or can create worlds. And of course, each poem is a world of its own. Um, uh, Someone once said, language in poetry doesn't describe, it summons.
Mm,
It summons into being. And there you
mm,
go. Basically, the difference between, say, poetry and prose to me is that we poets, especially lyric poets, we're committed to the magical nature of language, to that power to summon. Well, okay,
Ah,
we summon something and with language, and you summoned it into the sacred circle of language that is the poem. There's a great Robert Duncan poem, not my favorite poem. This is an incredible poem. It begins, often I am permitted to return to a meadow that is a made place, not of my making. And a poem is this kind of magical space, like that meadow. It's a made place, but it's not of my making. And it's in it, things happen with heightened reality. Some of that has to do with the way that, um, as the first Chinese thinkers about poetry said, it starts in the heart. It pushes itself out and first it becomes sighing, then it turns into words, and then that's still not enough, so it becomes song.
mm,
And next, the hands and feet involuntarily start moving in time with the music. So, it's that whole, I mean, this is that original Chinese thinking about it. And it's a lyric thinking. It's not a narrative descriptive, but if you're a lyric poet, it's a temperament. So
mm,
for
mm,
for many of us, that experience is so intense,
mm,
and we experience in writing poems, the being transported, that ecstatic feeling,
mm.
uh, which is not a
Summon.
permanent state. Like Keats tells us in Ode to a Nightingale, already with thee. I mean, he's down here in the dark, and then there's the nightingale up there in the branches, and he flies there. He says, "Hey, I could take drugs, I could have a lot of drinks, I could get up there that way, but no, I'm going to go by way of imagination, invisible wings of imagination." And
Oh,
he's there. He's up there with a bird, but
oh.
it can't last. It's ecstatic, it's out of the body, but
Mm,
then you crash back. He crashes back on a word. He's going like, "Fairy seas forlorn." And he says, "Forlorn." In the middle of the poem, he says, "Forlorn." The very word is like a bell that
mm,
tolls me back from thee to my soul self.
mm, mm, mm.
So there's a transcendence in the return to the body. But every time we read a poem, that spirit of uplifting and intensification, a poem we love, a poem that's beautiful to us. And
I
I
think
mean,
the word summon, I think that that is a secret because it is to create something that didn't exist before when you
yeah,
summon. And
yeah.
therefore, you've said it, it's a holy thing, this collaboration with the invisible. But I think you've said it, so you've demonstrated the answer to me. You've demonstrated the answer to me. So you see, I brought all my questions in a little basket, and you're going to get them one by one. And until then,
But
read us a few. Read us a few, and I'll tell them who you are. Even more so, um, Greg Orr is the author of a memoir, The Blessing, which was chosen as one of the 50 best nonfiction books of 2002. And his autobiographical essay as a volunteer in the civil rights movement was called Return to Hayneville and was reprinted in the Best Essays, Best Creative Nonfiction of 2009 and the Pushcart Prize. So give us a little handful and then we'll dissect what we hear. This is The Poet and the Poem from the Library of Congress. We're on location with one of the world's really, truly lasting poets, Gregory Orr.
we're going to talk some point about short poems and lyric, and this is
Yeah,
about as short as you can get.
I'm interested.
It's 5 lines long. To be alive, not just the carcass, but the spark. That's crudely put, but if we're not supposed to dance, why all this music? I guess that's not unrelated to that Chinese thing where it's like, yeah, if it gets certain level of intensity, you know, you hear the music, it's just everywhere, and you start to dance. Oh well, I should not comment on the poems. I should write them and read
No,
them.
we want it all. We want it all.
Okay. Has the moon been up there all these nights and I never noticed? A whole week with my nose to the ground, to the grind,
Mm.
and the beloved faithfully returning each evening as the moon. Where have I been? Who has abandoned whom? I guess the figure of the beloved or the phrase beloved appears in a lot of my poems.
It does.
Um,
Who is the beloved?
the beloved is what brings us out of ourself. It's an otherness that brings us into relation. It can be a self of a lover or a wife or a creature. I mean, obviously, my beagle hound mix back there is one of my beloveds. Um, it can be a place, a loved place. It can be a tree. Martin Buber talks about the experience of I and thou, and he once put his hand against a tree, and he just felt its presence as thou. And the I thou, that connection, relation between things is meaning. And so many of us start with, these small connections. Ultimately, the beloved is the entire world. I mean, that's the state you want to see. Now, the beloved for me is not God or any divine figure that, the beloved is mortal. It seems to me part of this, and part of my story, part of my understanding of what it is to be human, which is we're in a mortal world. It becomes meaningful when we come into relation to it. And of course, a poem is trying to create these relationships among words and about the creature. I mean, the moon, if you see the moon, if you really, when you see it, it's beautiful, which is the beloved.
But it can be the divine. I mean, we won't exclude the other.
No, no, yeah,
For those
absolutely.
who wish to go there, we
Oh,
can
absolutely.
include
No, no.
the
I'm just saying
invisible
for me
world.
personally, I have
I just didn't want to those people who are
good Lord,
not
no.
theists need to be included, and you have made that clear.
Oh, of course,
Yes.
absolutely. No, I would never want to exclude the divine, but my own experience of the divine is was cut short by childhood trauma and being raised in a rather harsh religion that
Mm,
didn't.
mm. Which has nothing to do with the divine. But
Absolutely,
yeah, but but
absolutely.
what you are doing
Something
is
personal.
grounding us in the fact that everything is holy, really.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything. And so let's keep going with your poetry.
Blake says, whatever lives is holy. Or wit.
Damn right. Damn right.
Damn right, right on.
Come on, more poetry. Gregory Orr. He's answering all my questions. Now you're going to read Hoarding Your Joys and Father's Song.
Hoarding your joys and despairs as if they were clothes you bought but never wore. Look at this bright shirt, a possibility you glimpsed but feared to seize. The beloved is waiting. You have a date. Put on that shirt before it fades. Does that sound funny? I hope so.
You know, I was questioning hoarding because this poem is the opposite of hoarding. So I was interested in why you use that word when you're saying something and meaning something else. This is totally the opposite. It is giving. So the
But
irony in
but
this poem.
it starts in a dark place. Hoarding is the isolated self.
Mm, 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 mm.
Hoarding is what we have done with ourselves when we're cut off from the world. We don't go dead inside. If only we did. I mean, the isolated people pray to be numb, but often they've hoarded all of their being, all of their emotions, all of everything.
That's
And
very painful to
isn't
hear.
it? Yeah. Well,
Very painful.
beauty sometimes starts in pain.
It's,
And the impulse to connect has to come from, I think, from a feeling of being disconnected. Certainly that's what poetry is for me. It's a poem is making a meaning. A poem is a meaning. It doesn't have a meaning, it is a meaning, you know? And so this is a character who's afraid to connect to the world. I mean, he saw the shirt and he bought it, but he can't live it. He can't
And there's your message again. The beloved is waiting. The beloved being that
get a
tree, that
date. Come
sky,
on, show
that
up.
that land, that pond, that meadow. The beloved is waiting, isn't it? Um,
Yeah.
Continue. I want to just keep telling them your credentials because they're pretty important. But go on with another poem first.
Okay, so this is called Father Song. Unlike my new ones, this one has a title, Father Song. Yesterday, against admonishment, my daughter balanced on the couch back, fell and cut her mouth. Because I saw it happen, I knew she was not hurt. And yet, a child's blood's so red, it stops a father's heart. My daughter cried her tears. I held some ice against her lip. That was the end of it. Round and round, bow and kiss. I try to teach her caution. She tries to teach me risk.
Did you learn it? It's something you can't teach and you can't learn.
No, I'm a natural born coward.
Yes, isn't it wonderful? That gives us more time to write.
Yes, well, that's one of the secrets. It certainly is. But I mean, I'm always afraid. I mean, I'm always worried that someone will get hurt.
Mm.
I mean, because
Worry is a form
things,
of prayer.
well, I like
So,
that.
in
Good.
addition
I
to
was writing that
everything
down.
else, Greg is the author of Poetry as Survival, and that was the University of Georgia Press, and a consideration of the existential function of the personal lyric. That's what we're asking him about today. He's also written a primer for poets and readers of poetry, Norton, and he was on Krista Tippett's show on Being. Was that fun?
It was.
I
It really
bet.
was. Yes.
I hope I can access that recording someday. He's received the Guggenheim, the NEA, an award from the literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Have you had enough, Greg? Do you want more?
More than
Let's
enough.
let's go. Let's go with poetry, which is more than enough for you. And read do it. Read to us.
So let's see.
Certain
This
poems.
I mentioned Keats' Ode to a Nightingale, and first time I wrote a poem when I was like 18, and it was just an escapist fantasy made out of language, but I
Mm,
felt such a magical thrill,
mm, mm.
and so that ecstatic impulse in lyric is something that's really strong for me, and I get it. Again, Keats is one of the key figures for me there, but that escape is only part of it, and then there the and that escape is like hoarding your despairs, or joys and despairs. It's that. Well, anyway, here we go. Doesn't have a title. Certain poems offer me escape. They're floating islands, anchored only by a cloud rope of words I can climb. Some are the opposite, insisting on embodiment, as if they were tattooed on the beloved's thigh.
Mm.
Still others are short and sharp, arrows aimed at the heart, as if the purpose of beauty was to hurt me more alive.
Mm. Now, I'm going to ask you something which has bothered me and my friends. I don't know if you know the poet Michael Gushu, but he was talking to me about the wound and the bow. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
have been teaching, have taught for 70 years, really. And I've always tried to get people to the wound
Wow,
because,
congratulations.
otherwise we don't have much. And so Michael was saying how the bow was given to the poet for the arrow, for the wound. Now,
Mm.
Sophocles has talked about this. I still can't get it. I still can't understand how the bow from the poet and an arrow can heal the wound.
No, 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 no.
No, no. So help, help, help.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a confusing story.
I'm
Uh,
way wrong.
and
Yeah.
you mentioned this the other day in an email, and
Mm-hmm.
so I was going back to the book by Edmund Wilson called The
Yes,
Wounded
I
Bow.
have it on my desk.
And let's, at a certain point, interestingly, only at the end of the book, he refers to this Greek legend about the wound and the bow and
Yes.
part of the Trojan War nonsense. Anyway, forget it, because trying to understand it through that wound and bow, that Greek story, you get nowhere. But what
Oh,
Wilson seemed to be saying, and I get this, is that when he was, and he's writing mostly about fiction writers, and he said early wounding, childhood wounding, let's call it trauma. That's a word for it. We use, of course, trauma means wound, but childhood trauma um, affects writers so that later they're in their writing, they're often trying to rework um, that early childhood stuff. And his people are all fiction writers, really. I mean, Edwin Wilson, what he understands about poetry, you could put in a walnut shell and still have room. He's not interested in that. God bless him. He's interested in fiction. And so he writes about Dickens and he writes about Rudyard Kipling and how he had to work as a kid in a blacking factory and his parents were in debtor's prison. And these scenes, these situations come back up in his work. They were horrible for him as a kid. As a mature writer, he comes back to them and tries to, make stories or meaning or something redemptive out of it. And I get that. That's fine. But forget the bow. Because as
oh,
soon as
because
you get into the bow,
Sophocles, I was studying Sophocles because Michael Gushu gave me the book and I could not square it. Okay, no, help.
the Greeks are nuts. Forget the Greeks, except Sappho. Want to hear Sappho Fragment 16?
Why
This
not?
is one of my favorite poems in the world. Okay. So it goes, Fragment 16. Some say an army marching, or a raiding fleet under or cavalry charging, or a raiding fleet under sail is the most beautiful sight on this black earth. But I say, whatever one loves most is beautiful.
Mm.
And then she goes on a stanza later and talks about Anactoria and two things about her: the way she smiles and the way that her hips move when she's walking away from her. And she said, that's beautiful to me. And so you see, there it is. There's the Greeks. Let's go kill somebody. Let's go march. Let's go raid and pillage. That's how to get glory. That's beautiful. Which is, of course, horrible bullshit. But it's the heroic ideal. Violence and destruction is, you know, enhancing your glory. She says, no, go for intimacy. Whatever one loves most is beautiful. She happens to, and we don't, when we love most, it's going to be something intimate. Again, I mentioned my beagle hound dog or
That's right.
my
And
Hawaiian beagle.
women knew from the beginning,
They did, absolutely. She's
we rock.
founded. She,
Absolutely.
she
We
gets
knew.
it all going. She
Oh,
gets us
that's
on the right
beautiful.
track. And she shows us what the wrong track is. The wrong track is a power leads to glory, but no, love leads to meaning.
Greg Orr says, arrows aimed at the heart, as if the purpose of beauty was to hurt me more alive. I value my trauma, Greg. I value my wound. I've made a career out of it. Go
Yeah,
to heart. Go to heart. I'm really interested. In your new book, are you not going to have titles for your poems, or are you going to do it?
gosh, I don't remember.
Oh, wow. It's
I think
already
so.
at
I
the
think I may have
publisher?
gone back to some titles, and this
Mhm.
has a title,
Wait a
but
minute. You went already sent it to Norton?
yeah,
Oh, so already you finished it.
I think so. Of course,
Oh, that it
you
takes a
hesitate to
year.
say that.
It takes a
You know,
year to come out. Yeah.
if you make a list of things you're supposed to do as a poet, and one of them is called, you know, get a title for your poem, to
Mhm.
me, that's way down on the list.
Oh,
My least favorite parts of poem writing, do you enjoy it? I don't like
well,
it.
the point is, it's for the indexers, isn't it?
Yeah, well, maybe, but it
Mhm.
can be confusing because, you're trying to, oh God, you remember when we first started writing as kids and we got a zinger of a last line? Uh, you know, look at the daffodils is the last line. And so you say, that's so good. I'm going to have that as the title. And, and, and,
That's
and
so
then
funny. That is
And
so
that
right.
doesn't work because the
Yeah.
zinger is in the surprise. And,
And
and so you don't understand dramatic suspense as a kid. And
the outtakes on the floor make good titles if you need one because they were probably organic to the poem. Kind of a fragment that was in the poem that you threw out. That works. And
yeah.
David Keplinger always takes off the last line of all of his poems
Ah,
because just for the hell of it, because he
yeah.
wants to fan out and make everything possible. So read us these
Wow.
short poems because I'm very interested in them.
Okay. This is a short poem called Heart, thinking about the heart. And it's they're just four very short sections. Heart. Its hinges rustless, restless, opening and shutting on trust. We guard it. It guides us. Gods lack it, vacant their gaze. Doctors listen to its cryptic lisp, from sacred to scared. A few beats skipped, a letter slipped. Cavity and spasm, a spark can start it, parting stop it. Such a radiant husk to hive our dust.
I don't know a couplet that I love more than that one. Such a radiant husk to hive our dust. Oh my, that says everything. We can throw away everything else. This is
Well,
it.
maybe I
This
should have
is
just
it. Just put that out.
maybe I should have
Throw
just
away the
done that
book
as the poem.
and just put those two lines out. It is, it is summoning. It is summoning. Yeah. And what do you make of do you think the older we are, the more impatient we are and we write shorter poems? Or do you think we really know the value of what the Japanese knew about this, the image and then the radiance of that image? That's what you're doing here.
And also the depth that you can have a simple, brief surface, but that doesn't mean it's superficial. You can have this smallness is an invitation to find depth and significance within
Mm,
that
mm,
brief
mm,
brevity. You know, again, back to the classic Blake, to see a world in a grain of sand
mm, mm,
and a
mm,
heaven in a wildflower. That focus is going to reveal, you know, what's hidden within your hope. I mean, and so to me, um, yeah, I mean, well,
Well,
brevity
only
has
the
something.
poet can make diminishment great. So only the poet can turn things upside down because the poet is a magician, as we know. And aren't we lucky that they can take the idea of small and make it large? And that's what all this is about. We guard it, it guides us, gods lack it, vacant their gaze. This is really lyrical. It's interesting how lyricism can be found in 3 lines. People have done epics trying to get it. And so what do you think the lyric is since you've been written about this?
I'm sorry.
You have written
Oh,
extensively about
lyric.
the lyric. So just what is it?
Well,
Is it about syllables?
no, I think it's somehow an utterance from a personal perspective, but it doesn't necessarily be, and it's not necessarily the person, the poet. It's certainly not Greg Orr. Emily Dickinson said once in her letter to Higginson, she said, "When I say I in a poem, I mean a supposed person." You know, in other words, the I stands in for all of us. You know, the I is an invitation to the reader to enter that world and to see it from the imagination and language and circumstance of the poet who's making that utterance. Whitman, what I assume you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. What a wonderful piece of hocus pocus. But what he means is, identify with me and I'm going to show you the open road and I'm going to show you that everything is beautiful
Mm,
and that
mm,
we're all equal.
mm,
Men
mm,
and women,
mm,
all,
mm.
all
Trees
genders,
and
all races,
dandelions.
we're all just grass, blades of grass in this visionary democracy. It's
Mhm.
beautiful, but you do it by becoming him. He says somewhere, he said in the preface to the Leaves of Grass, he says, the two things are pride, the two pillars of art are pride and sympathy. Now, pride is himself, is the self. It's where he talks about, here it is, all of me, and it's so luscious. You know, that kind of vanity of bodily vitality, vanity of Whitman. And then sympathy is when you identify with someone else. It's what we would call empathy now. You know, it's becoming someone else. He says in a line here, he says, in Song of Myself, he says, I do not ask the wounded person how he feels. You know, you know, I myself become the wounded person. I lean on my cane. Oh, golly.
That
My
is the
hurts
poet.
turn livid upon me as I lean on a cane and observe.
I become the wounded person.
Becomes the wounded. It's Francis of Assisi who identifies so strongly with Christ that the
Mm.
stigmata appear on his body,
Oh,
right?
that's a good analogy.
Isn't
That
it?
is
But that's what
perfect.
women's do.
That
That's
is
what women's referring to, I think.
wonderful. I
That's what
love that. You
women's
know, I
tricky.
just wish that everyone had you as a teacher. I know some who have. I know what you taught a little bit by your reputation. What did you learn?
Okay, what have I learned? I don't know. I know the lesson that I most want to give to my students that, it got clearer and clearer to me was permission, to give them permission, to have them give themselves permission to turn what's in them into words, you know, that inhibition, that hoarding your joys and despairs for fear or for whatever.
Did you
So
teach the canon as well as creative writing,
I
or did you braid it all in together?
I I see, yeah, I sort of put it in together. I don't
Mm.
think my literature colleagues would have been interested in my opinions about the canon. And
Oh,
that's
oh,
okay. There
oh.
you go. But
Well,
I think I mean I have to, you hear me referencing all my poetic heroes here. I mean,
mm,
you but I teach what I love, and it's part of
mm.
the student's job is to find what they love.
Oh,
You know,
that's perfect. That is it. That goes on every college wall. I teach what I love, and I teach the students to find what they love. What else can we say about education? But you know what? We have a treat for the audience today. And it is, I don't even have to call Norton and ask for permission because we're getting a premiere of a poem which will be published next year and has never been heard before. And it is uh,
correct.
a premiere on the poet and the poem, which is going to make me famous, by the way. It's called Orpheus Grown Old. And I want to know before you start, who is Orpheus?
Yeah.
Who
Uh,
was he? I mean, some people really don't know.
sure, sure. Well, he was this legendary Grecian figure, Greek figure. Anyway, he's he's he was a poet, and he was a lyric poet, and lots of people like Rilke and stuff take him as a kind of essence of the lyric poet. I think I would too. Um, uh, that is to say, he used language magically. He
Mm,
could understand birds and speak to them, and
mm,
animals and speak to them. He could
mm,
make trees and rocks dance.
mm.
That's pretty cool. That's, again, we're talking about that magical um, power of language in poetry. I mean, that, they're not going to sing and dance unless they're hearing a magical spell. So he had that kind of magic. I think he's a person. I don't think he was a demigod or anything, a half god, half person. Anyway, the other thing is he has this love, Eurydice, and so Orpheus and Eurydice. Eurydice uh, is bitten by a snake and dies, uh, and so she goes down into Hades, into hell, and Orpheus is destroyed, and he determines to go down and retrieve her from hell, which again you can't do. A living person can't go into the world of the dead, but he does, and he gets her back, gets permission to bring her back. And the story is, and they start up, and then but the Hades, the king of hell, has said to them, you know, don't turn around, don't look back. If you do, it's all over. She has to return, and of course he does, and so on. And the story goes on from there. But for me, the part that I'm focusing on here is Orpheus as that being connected to the created material world, the trees and the animals and humans, that connected, and that connection is in jeopardy. So that's in sort of mythic terms, and I think this is also about the destruction of our natural world and extinction of species that we so casually enact.
Well,
And
we will
now,
be honored to hear Orpheus Grown Old by Gregory Orr.
Okay, and it's I'll pause between sections. It's a lyric sequence. Orpheus grown old, wizened as the stick he leans on, he ponders something decaying on the riverbank, remains of some obscure sacrifice. Old goat with a severed throat. Croak, croak. Frogs along the shore make sounds less grating than Orpheus now, who's lived past so many of those he knew and loved, lived almost past purpose. Croak, croak, not just a sound he makes, but a dream he sometimes harbors. Haunting the edges and marshy places, no longer welcome in either realm. Not that it matters much, the distinction between them mostly abolished now, as if daylight was invaded by shadows, and the dark drenched in fluorescence, harsher than an all-night gas stop. The slender path to Hades he walked so long ago is a highway now. And that grim stream he crossed, not only wider and more toxic, but bridged and told in both directions. He's worn out now and worries the same is true about the world around him. Has it also slipped a gear or two? This thin, persistent fog he sees, simply a sign his eyes are failing? Or has some translucent blanket settled over everything he loves? It seems so long ago now, lost, as they say, in the mists of time, lost in the myths. That day, the world seduced him, caused him to yield, to cast off distance. Of this, he's certain. Once there were far more birds, far more raucous calls and songs. Where have they all gone? Those creatures and plants that seem to thrive on the slow roll of the seasons. Orpheus knows he's had a long and mostly lucky life. Yet still he aches to be renewed, whether by weather or the wonder of flowers and birds. The world, the world, always the world. How often he used words to bring it closer, used them as a lens to observe it and bring it into focus. Oh, what a century he'd been born in. What a harsh one in which he'd expire. Yet there was no use pretending he was still qualified for his job. His heart wasn't large enough. He was old and tired. How could he witness all this diminishing and still sing? Even as Orpheus speaks, another species vanishes completely. goes the way of the Carolina parakeet, the passenger pigeon. Now neither sadness nor shame nor rage can alter their fate. He suspects we humans must have voted somewhere in our secret hearts that we didn't need them. Now it's true, we don't. Although our trip will be that much lonelier without them. A whole species no more than a small bright torch someone held aloft as we all marched into the deepening dark. And now it's gone out.
The title of this poem is what, Gregory?
Orpheus grown old.
'Cause this poem is about all that we have lost or
And
may. But then the writing of the poem is the redemption of that. And Orpheus lives and he is vital and he's alive because of the poem. So it doesn't matter what really happened in the myth
yeah, yeah.
because you brought him to life again. Was that hard to write?
This poem,
Yeah.
um,
Or was it in you and you just had to say it?
let me put it this way. I think, okay, I write every day. I have since I was my early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
It's my discipline
Mm-hmm.
and joy. Um, and so I write, and like now, if I'm writing a poem, uh, I could rewrite it 300 times
Oh,
and not not get it right even. But so that's a kind of way I work, and with all these poems that are half baked and half done, I always have something to work on. That's
so
one
did
kind of
this
thing.
take a while? Was this like fragments that
Well,
flawed?
then there's another kind of poem for me, which I call out of nowhere. And my out of nowhere poems, just like pop, there they are. They just happen. I mean, I don't even think about them. They're putting themselves on the page. And boy, if that could happen every day, I'd be a happy camper, you
Mhm.
know, um, because some poems I really like that I wrote were out of nowhere. So it's those two kind of things. Now, this is mostly out of nowhere, and then there are other fragments. I mean, it came to me all in one morning.
Oh, wow.
But
Most people laugh at me, but I call it divine consciousness, where you pull it through you. Whatever, we are so pleased to be the first to hear it. And now we need a final poem from Gregory Orr. And I have asked that you read If Deepest Grief is Hell, which is just the first line. I'm not sure you sent that in as a title or not.
no, yes, yeah. Um,
We'll have to buy the book to see if there are titles because
be
you
my
can't
guest.
remember.
I'm your guest. Be my guest. If deepest grief is hell, when the animal self wants to lie down in the dark and die also. If deepest grief is hell, then the world returning, not soon, not easily, must be heaven. The joke you laughed at must be heaven. Or the funny thing the cat did at its food dish. Whatever guides you back to the world, that dark so deep the tiniest light will do.
And it does. The voice of Greg Orr, and this is the poet and the poem from the Library of Congress. We're on location. The program is funded by the Sci-Nippet Fund, by friends of the program Natalie Canavore and Sandy Jackson Cohen. We want to thank the Library of Congress for making the program possible. And our engineer is Mike Turpin. I am Grace Cavalieri.